Sisay clearly makes its case in the data to be considered for the number one deck. Welcome back to Colors Are a Crutch. I am your host, Max P. I am by myself this time with a special guest, Datatog, because Max Sternberg, aka WoundedSatellite, is literally on the side of a mountain right now. He is climbing mountains in Colorado, and he will not be joining us this week. So instead, we're going to be diving into some data analysis with the one and only Datatog. Datatog, you want to introduce yourself? Tell us what you do and why you're here.
Hello, my name is Datatog. I do some data analysis solely in the space of CEDH for quite some time now, and I'm happy to talk with you about it.
Yeah, excellent. And it's kind of good timing because, last week we released our top 15 CEDH deck rankings, which was completely subjective. We did take into account some data at times when it suited us, and we didn't when it didn't suit us. So, completely subjective. And I know there were a lot of people who were sad-faced and hurt feelings because their deck didn't rank high enough, or they thought like I was a hypocrite by taking into account data on certain decks and not on others. But rankings are subjective. Rankings are only loosely based on data. Now we're going to get into actual data and really look at what's going on in CEDH right now. Thanks to this crazy good analysis that Datatog has put together in a website that really gets into it. And the good news is when we're all done with this, it's going to be in a link in the description below. So please, check that out. Hopefully you like our stuff. So subscribe, check out our Patreon, do all that kind of good stuff. So with that, Datatog, what kind of data do we have at our disposal here?
So I think everybody's familiar with EDH Top 16. This is the, I wanted to say main data source, but it's the only data source. So shout out to Top Deck for sponsoring you, I guess, right? And providing me with the data. So we have all the tournament results, all the matchups, all win, draw, all stuff like that. And big disclaimer already, there are a tons of metrics that we can look at, and I can't tell you which ones are the right ones to look at. And if you sort by any one of them, you get a different ranking. So even though data is telling an objective truth, we're not always capable of asking the right questions, so people will still complain no matter what. But I think it was Ryan from Playing with Power that said that data doesn't give us the answers, it gives us the ability to ask better questions, and I always like that, and that's what we're gonna do. We'll dig in and try to ask better questions.
I guess to start with, you've got this tab here that says current metagame. What does that show us, and what insights can we glean from it? Let's take a look.
So current metagame. This is mainly aimed at what people are playing right now.
Yeah.
Right now is in quotation marks. We can't always get a snapshot of the current time. So what we usually have to do is we have to pick a time frame, and most of the time people pick 1 month. I tend to use 8 weeks, so roughly 2 months as that time frame, because it gives us a more stable result in the matter that if there's a single month with a single event where a single commander does exceptionally well, he's at the top of the ranking at the 1 month and he's gone the next month. And I want to have a more continuous look at the whole thing. So that's why we pick 8 weeks. And here we can see in the last 8 weeks, there were 5,170 total entries gathered across 445 unique commanders. So people bringing a lot of different stuff to these events.
Yeah, you talk about some variance, man. That's pretty crazy. 445 unique commanders over the last 8 weeks. So if anyone, I've been terrified that the format has been sort of congealing around Blue Farm and becoming less and less interesting. This kind of disproves that, doesn't it? I mean,
a lot of these
pretty crazy.
A lot of these are one-offs or two-offs, but still people are building these decks and they're bringing them to events where they play for prizes and money and stuff, and they're having fun with it. That's awesome. And in the first pie chart here, we can already see this huge chunk of one-offs basically.
That's the less than point 0.5%.
Yeah,
Is that what
yeah,
that is?
exactly.
Those are all one-offs.
Commanders that each for themselves make up less than 0.5% of the meta, and commanders like these make up almost 30% of everything. 0.5 is also just an arbitrary cutoff. Imagine a 200-person event, and even there, on average, you wouldn't expect anyone to be on any given commander from that section.
Right. So 0.5%. So if it's 200 people, that means one deck at that
tournament. Yeah, exactly. And these are even less than 0.5%. So it's really stuff you can't even imagine or think of that anybody would bring. And 30% of the people or the entries are from this section, which is awesome to see. The other 70% are currently labeled other, but we can fill in. Like the top 10 probably makes sense, right? It's a pretty number. And then it instantly looks like this. And there's a lot of stuff that we would expect. Blue Farm makes up the lion's share here for the single commanders. It's 11.7 across the last 8 weeks.
Okay.
That's stuff you can also see when you go on EDH Top 16, right? You wouldn't need me to tell you this, that TNK is the top. Kinnan is next, Sisay is there.
Right.
Tivit, Najeela.
It's still cool to see it visually. It's kind of a visual pie chart instead of just seeing the percentage marks on the EDH Top 16 site. So
yeah, usually if people wanna dig deeper, they copy paste just what they see on EDH Top 16 into some Excel sheet, and then you can also do it in there. But it's cumbersome, of course.
Well, you say that like it's easy because you're a data scientist. Like the rest of us are like, nah, I'm not doing that. That's too much work. You want me to use Excel and make graphs? Come on, that's too much work. What about some of the other stuff on here? So I was looking at the colors, like the meta breakdown by amount of colors.
By amount of colors.
Right.
So this on the right here.
Yeah. To me, this is crazy because everyone talks about Blue Farm is just dominating, including us, right? But it looks like the vast majority of decks in the meta are either 2 or 3 colors.
Yeah, that was also surprising to me because you would expect that if the top deck has 4 colors, then if you group them by amount of colors, that this would also be somewhere at the top. But it's 4 colors are in 3rd place here. The majority of people seem to gravitate to 3 color piles. You can see on the left the first 3 color deck that we encounter is Tivit. There's also Roxai, but these are the only 2 3 color decks in the top 10. So out of this other and less than 0.5% portion, a lot of these must also be 3 color. I don't know the reason.
Yeah, I'm thinking like Malcolm Timna, you got Thrasios Dargo, you got Brassios Rock, you got there's a lot of interesting 3 color decks out there.
Definitely, yeah. And so people seem to enjoy them.
It kind of makes sense, and it proves that colors are a crutch because 70% of the meta is 3 colors or less, and only 30% of the meta is 4 colors.
There you have it. The channel name is scientifically proven.
Okay, and then we got colors by inclusion, right?
Yeah.
So
this is not mono white or something, but every mono white, every Azorius, every Esper, every Blue Farm deck contributes to this section of the pie, and then you can see which are the most played colors.
Is there a way for you to change the time frame? Like, so could you compare like the pie chart here to like a year ago? Is that possible? Is there a way to do that?
It's almost as we would have set this up, because the next section is basically exactly that. These 2 graphs are these 2 pie charts, the one in the middle and the one on the right, but with time. This very last slice in this plot is the pie chart that you see up here. So there's this 25.5 for blue, and this around 15-ish for green. And here we can go back in time. It's not a whole year.
It's like July of 23.
Yeah, it's just... So I've
10 months.
I've marked some set releases here. I skipped reprint sets, but just the new sets. So here's Lord of the Rings, and then we have just the very first data point shortly before the release of Lord of the Rings. Every single dot here represents an 8-week window. So just as above here, every dot is the average of the 8 weeks before. And here we can see that blue, for example, made a rise. It was always the most popular color, but it got even more popular.
Let's see, things that jump out to me, right? So I would have thought that white would be on the climb because there's been a lot of good white cards published over the last year. So I'd expect to see that line going up. Instead, it's declining. So people are playing less and less white than they used to, which is really interesting. And green seems pretty stable. I mean, sort of slow drop, but then has actually come up a little bit, which is surprising to me because we know that Wizards hates green and won't print any good CEDH cards for green. But this doesn't seem to have affect how much it's being played. And blue, which I thought was always like the highest by far, is somehow still getting richer. Which is,
that's really surprising. Once again, when you think about blue farm as the top dog, then you would just expect that all 4 colors of blue farm would be rising, right? But apparently people are disproportionately changing away from other white decks, and the rise of blue farm cannot catch the drop of white.
Really interesting. And of course, Grixis dominates and continues to dominate the most powerful colors in CEDH for sure, and that hasn't changed.
Yeah, if you wanted to interpret something, Lord of the Rings had one of our best friends in black, the Orcish Bowmasters.
Yeah.
And that also seems to be the shifting point for black going above red. Yeah, here on the right, you can see the time evolution for this. For the amount of colors. That's more stable.
Very stable.
Yeah. The one outlier you can see here is bump in 3 color, and then it drops, not immediately, but something happened here. Right? Apparently there was a 3 color deck.
This looks like Lord of the Rings. Lord of the Rings somehow brought something to the front.
Yeah.
That was a 3 color deck.
Yeah. There was a certain 3 color deck that was extremely popular, and then it dropped. And since I already looked at this, I know the answer.
Dahada?
It's Tivit.
It's Tivit. Yeah.
Tivit.
Yeah. Tivit Summer.
Tivit was extremely popular.
So funny.
And now it's still very popular. Like we saw above, it's still 3.6%.
Because I remember, and this is the summer of Tivit. Everyone talked about Mardu Summer, but it was really Tivit Summer. And I remember taking Florian to tournaments and being terrified that I was going to run into 800 Graph Digger's Cage from Tivit, and it was true. So and then for some reason unknown, it just completely dropped off, and I don't know why. It's like the mystery of Tivit. Why did Tivit suddenly fade all of a sudden? And it looks like, was that Wilds of Eldraine is about when it started its drop, but even before that. So maybe it's just the correction. Like Tivit got so popular that everyone adjusted to it, and then it dropped off pretty hard after that because nobody wanted to play Tivit like everyone else was playing Tivit, or didn't want to deal with the meta being so prepared for Tivit, which it seemed to get right after the spike here.
True, yeah.
I think that's maybe what happened.
Yeah.
Okay.
I mean, at this point, it would, of course, be great to have other mechs here instead of him touching grass in some hill, right? Because just having an extra pair of eyes that's also attending in a lot of tournaments has valuable insights.
And then you got breakdown by commander. This is like my favorite section of the data.
So these two were the time evolution of the middle and the right chart. But the time evolution of the left chart would, of course, be the most interesting. So here we can see the time evolution of the meta share for single commanders. Here we can see this 12% share of Blue Farm that we saw at the top, and this somewhere around 7% share of Kinnan here right at the end. And we can see how it evolved with time. This evolution is something that we would expect, right? We knew that TNK was popular always, and we knew that it gotten more popular over time. What was interesting for me to see here is, if you wouldn't have shown me this, I would have guessed that starting with Lord of the Rings, there would have been a rise almost immediately, because Bowmasters are such an impactful card, not only for TNK itself, but for the whole meta in which we are currently in. But there wasn't much of a difference all the way till here. Here's Doctor Who, and I don't think it's something that's specifically from Doctor Who that made it jump up, but it also takes some time to adjust, right, to any new evolutions. And somewhere around here, we went from 7 to 8 to now almost 12%. So that's a 50% increase in
huge jump
in meta share, which is insane in a format so diverse as we saw in the beginning, right, where so many people bringing one-offs or two-offs to events.
Yeah, absolutely dominating, if you look at it from that perspective. But it's interesting too, like, I wonder if it just took that long for the impact of Lord of the Rings to catch up, or whether or not we just were wrong, and like Lord of the Rings wasn't the impetus for Blue Farm taking over, and maybe a different factor. Like, I can speculate, maybe it's like EDH Top 16. When did EDH Top 16 become more and more popular? Like, I've been thinking for days or for weeks now that people go to EDH Top 16 and they look at the top deck. The top deck is Blue Farm. People go and play Blue Farm, right? So I wonder if it's sort of a snowball effect, where people become aware that Blue Farm is great, and they just more and more people pick it up, so it shows up in the data.
Yeah,
that could be a big factor.
Could be, yeah. I don't know if it's still true, but for a long time we've been telling people that Kinnan is a good deck to start with CEDH. This explains more of the rise of Kinnan here, and we come to that later. Kinnan's performance is really bad. I'm sorry to say, but it's really bad compared to how popular it is, right? Which might also be the cause. Other mechs could maybe tell us this. Maybe people are just playing Kinnan wrong. There's just a handful of people that can play correctly.
He would say that. He would definitely say that. But it's funny because if you look at Timnacrom has picked up more and more and more players, but its performance stays stable. Whereas Kinnan picks up more and more players and its performance nosedives.
Yeah.
So that's take from that what you will, but I would that kind of supports what Max has said all along, which is Kinnan is a much harder deck to master.
We were talking about performance. I guess we should quickly explain where we take this performance from. So there's this plot on the right here. It's called EV points. It stands for expected value of points. It's basically my way of giving a deck a win rate that also incorporates the draws. So in the current tournament structure, you get 5 points for a win and 1 point for a draw. This EV points metric looks at all the points that a commander gathered across all the events in a given time frame and divides it by the number of games that it played. So this number on the right is the average amount of points you would expect for a single game. This red line here is the average that you would expect, given the draw rate that we observe right now, and the 25% win rate that you have on average for a commander game. So this is somewhere around the average.
So Kinnan on average is performing less than the average of all decks at this point.
Currently, yes.
That's something.
Yeah, that's a hard pill to swallow.
Hopefully he's not watching this on the side of the mountain.
Let's hope he has no connection there.
So add a couple other decks here, and I think you add them one at a time. If you add more than one at a time, the website will crash. But if you do...
Yeah.
One at a time. So add Talion and then add Najeela.
Okay.
Because that's some pretty interesting data points there.
Okay, we're adding Talion. Before we talk about it, let's add Najeela as well. Here we now can see Talion in green and Najeela in red. The Talion curve obviously starts somewhere after White of the Drain, because there was the release of the card. Let's see.
It's interesting because if you go back to like spring and summer of 23, Timnacrom, Kinnan, and Najeela were all very close, and then Najeela spikes and then falls off. Timnacrom stays extremely steady. Right, it's gotten a little bit more popular, a little bit more successful. Kinnan has just crashed pretty hard. Came a little bit of a spike, a little bit of a comeback at the beginning part of the year, and then fell and has fallen off really hard since then. Talion looks like it got off to a rough start, but then it is absolutely spiking. And if you look at the 4 decks ranked by your EV system, right, Timnacrom remains easily number 1, and Talion actually comes in at number 2 ahead of both Najeela and Kinnan at this point, if you look at the last 8 weeks.
One interesting for me to see here is that Bowmasters did not kill Najeela. It was something that was heavily discussed. So, Najeela is unplayable now because of Bowmasters. From the meta share, we can see people did not stop playing Najeela for quite some time. The drop was only somewhere around here, and we talk about the drop, but it's still one of the most popular decks. It's stabilized, so from 5%, it now stabilized here somewhere around 2%, which is still a huge share.
So it means I was probably too hard on Najeela in my rankings. I think it probably should have been ranked higher based on this. Still fallen off significantly. Yeah. I mean, I had it ranked number 1 in our first rankings. Definitely doesn't belong there anymore, but dropping, it's probably still top 10 deck at least, easy.
When we add more commanders here, I guess we will also see that Najeela is not up there anymore, but every commander that we add now has less and less data, so its EV points are less and less reliable. If we put in something like, if we put in Tameshi, which has basically no meta share, but its EV points are absolutely dominating, and we all know why. There was a single pilot that absolutely crushed it.
Yep.
And that's it.
We'll talk about him a little bit later too. Yeah, we'll get to that a little bit later, because this is all just deck data, but pilot data matters too, and we are going to get into a little bit of that in a bit. Other than EV points, there's also this conversion factor.
So there's this conversion factor. A while back, I've written a Reddit post about this, where conversion rate on EDH Top 16 is a nice thing to have, and it's an intuitive thing. Like, you can all the entries, you take all the top 16s and divide one by the other. It's something intuitive. You can grasp it. It's easy to understand, but in my opinion, it also has some flaws in it. Let's say you and I, we attend 10 tournaments, and in half of them, we make top 16, right? We have a conversion rate of 50%. That's insanely good. But I attended only 32 player events, and you attended only 128 player events. It was significantly harder for you to make top 16 than it was for me. So your accomplishment is much bigger than mine. And in my opinion, the conversion factor reflects that. That's exactly what I do for every commander, for every time point. I look at the events that they attended, how big they were, what were the chances on average to make top cut in these events, and then look at how they actually performed. And here we can see that.
And I think this is important too, because one of the things I like to do is go look at like top deck profiles, and top deck profiles is going to show you a conversion rate and a win percentage, and it's going to take into account all the events that you attended that are loaded into top deck. Yep. And you'll see people with extremely high conversion rates, but then you go and look at their individual events. They're like, they played in 10, 11 person events, so of course they're going to convert in all of those events. So it kind of artificially inflates their conversion numbers. So it makes it difficult to rely on that data to show how well a player is actually performing. Like I'll give myself as an example. I just top 16'd a local event. Woohoo! I made it into 11th place. That was with one win, because it was a small tournament. So that I don't take any value from that particular top 16 conversion. But if you look at my top deck profile, my conversion rate improves based on it. So this is important data to look at and think about, because it's a more real picture. Yeah, this is really interesting data. Really interesting data. What's this untimed factor piece here?
So every tournament is split into two portions. You have the Swiss rounds, where you have a time limit that affects each commander differently, and then after the Swiss rounds, there is a top 16 and top 4, and they don't have a time limit. So the texture of the game can change based on that. Some decks gain value in that area, some decks lose value in that area. And for that, I only take the games that have been played in the top 16s, so the semifinals and the finals. I do the same thing as before. I look at, on average, how many wins would I expect for this commander. So if you make top 16, you have a 25% chance of winning that game. And if you win that, that's 4 times more value than you were expected on average. But there's of course not only a single game, but a lot of games. So then I average these out. This is basically a complicated way of giving your win rate in untimed rounds. With this, we could, for example, check Roxai, Roxai is run where people always say, it's the deck that gets you in Swiss and then you die in non-time games.
Well, hold on, before you do that, let's do this. So instead of just doing Rograk, I think the top 4 decks in the format right now are Blue Farm, Kinnan, Roxai, and Sisay. So let's put those 4 up.
By top decks, do you mean based on popularity or based on performance?
Based on like sort of feeling of the community. Like I think the feeling of the community is that those 4 make up the top 4 decks.
So you said
whether that proves out in data or not.
Yeah. Sisay, right?
Yep, Sisay and Roxai. Yeah, so this is kind of a good this is a good counterpoint to the rankings, right? Because this is real data here, right? Now we can sort of look at it directly. So let's start with the EV points, because I think that's the most useful for how a deck's going to perform in Swiss theoretically, right?
Yeah, mostly. Since most of the games are happening in Swiss, the EV points is also mostly influenced by Swiss. So Team Kinnan we already saw before. Now we have Sisay here in green, which had a bumpy start here at around Lord of the Rings, but then it climbed really high and it kind of stayed at that level. There was some up and downs,
right?
But here it is. We had the feeling that Sisay has gotten way better, and the data would support that. And I think it was Kai who had Sisay at number 1 in your top 15 rankings,
yes.
Right? I'm not surprised by that.
Right. It makes sense. There's, because Sisay was number 1 and 1 data point there, right? And it looks like it was virtually tied in another, and then there's 2 other points where it's higher. So like Sisay clearly makes its case in the data to be considered for the number 1 deck. right? It shows that in this data.
And
Rogsai, look at Rogsai. Rogsai just super consistent over the last 5 months, 6 months. Over the last 6 months, look how consistent that is. Based on this, very clearly, those 3 decks are very close.
Yeah.
I think Rogsai is just a little bit below those 2 most of the time, but at times it's, it pushes. And looks like Sisay and Crom are switching places back and forth over the last 6 months. In reality,
which is really interesting because there's this clam chowder build now, right? And I don't know how far back it goes, but I think it's relatively new. When did we start talking about clam chowder? What was the last?
I believe in the boil. I think it's been
I think so too. Yeah.
So
that's only just recently.
Yeah.
But we can go back all the way to Wilds of Eldraine. Sisay was already top dog there. So.
Yeah,
and if we're correct that the clam chowder build was not around at that time, then clam chowder cannot be the reason why Sisay is so good now, because it was already good before. And this is not to discredit the clam chowder in any way. It's surely a valid way of playing Sisay, but it's not the reason it's up there at the moment.
Right. Sisay is good regardless. Yeah. So, clam chowder didn't suddenly make Sisay spike. So it's part of the data, but it's not the reason for the data. Put it that way.
And on the other hand, it also didn't drop Sisay all the way down, so it also can't be that bad.
Correct, right.
This is also a shortcoming of this, because we can't look at individual decks here, so there's no way of separating clam chowder from non-clam chowder builds.
So let's do one more look at one more thing, and then let's move on to like the pilots a little bit. So just looking at conversion factor here. If you look at conversion factor over the last 3 data points, there's one deck that's actually dominating that I didn't expect to see here. And that's Rogsai.
Yeah, there you have it. Rogsai brings you to top 16.
And then Sisay and Timna Crom are virtually tied, like basically the same exact place.
Yeah.
And Kinnan is way below average.
Yeah.
At this point.
And the tie between TNK and Sisay is interesting to see, because every metric has its own bias in some way or another. Some that we know and some that we don't know when we assume stuff. And to see the tie between TNK and Sisay in the EV points and in the conversion factor, and if we look to the right, in the untimed factor as well. So regardless of which metric we use, they're always around the same. Really makes me more confident to say they are practically equal.
Wow, this stuff is eye-opening, man. This stuff is eye-opening. So, I highly recommend everyone listening to this go to the link that we're going to include in the description. Work through this data yourself, glean your own results from it. Why don't we transition from this over to the pilots?
Yep, let's do it. So there's this thing here that I call the almanac. A few people are actually already aware of this. It's something that I've created a while back now, specifically aimed at supporting casters. At this point, I want to make a shout out to Lauren, the MTG hot dog, he's one of the people that are actively using this, and it puts a smile on my face every time I hear him use that on the stream. So, and the interesting part that we want to look at here, so there's some more stuff to dig around, which feel free to do, but the stuff that we want to look at now is the player stats. That's also the source of why I'm here now, basically, because a while back, it was after the boil, you were kind of down. I don't know, I think you went 2-3-2 or something like that. At the time, I started doing some ELO rankings, so something that they use in chess, for example, to gauge player ratings or player strength. And I did that, and I was surprised to see you so disappointed, because you were at a very, very good place in that ranking. And if we look at this, so we can sort by player ELO. So this here are all the players registered on Top Deck, sorted by their individual strength.
So number one player in the world is Ignacy, who is, you said this is...
I think it's Tremnek.
So if you look at Tremnek, then he's the 0.01% ELO ranking. So he's in the top 0.01% of all players, right? And you look here at number 6, we've got our boy, WoundedSatellite. He's in the 0.06% of all players. is pretty damn incredible. And then if you scroll down, actually before we go too far down, you'll see in the top 0.22%, you see Jason Baird. For those who don't know, we talked about Tameshi earlier. Jason Baird is the Tameshi pilot. That's Naestrom.
Ah, nice.
His Discord name. Yeah, so you can see how highly, you can see he's an incredible pilot, and it shows up here. You got your Blues Clues pilot here, Eric DeVoe, right?
Yeah.
With 0.19%. And then if you scroll all the way down to 0.54%, you'll find me.
Yeah. And you said it as if you would have to scroll down a lot. 0.05% is insane. Like so what this means is there are only 0.54% of the players in the whole field that are better, in quotation marks, than you, according to the current ELO ranking, which is an enormous accomplishment.
It's pretty cool. I'm not gonna lie, it's pretty cool. But I got some work to do. I gotta get to single digits. Let's go.
Here, you're above Sam Black.
Hey, there we go. But yeah, this is incredibly interesting information, and like there's so many names in here that I just know, I recognize, and it's really cool to see them, like this actually demonstrated. Hey, look, I'm above Memo. Holy shit, I'm above Memo. He's at 0.61%, and I'm at 0.54%. Yeah.
I wanted to just give a small disclaimer when we're talking about these rankings.
Yes, I was just gonna say. Yeah.
Okay. So you were thinking the same thing.
Yeah.
There is so this ELO is good. It's an interesting metric to look at, but a single good or bad event can swing this ELO with the current implementation quite a lot. So if a player with a high ELO score loses against a player with a low ELO score, he loses more points than if he would have lost against someone with more points. A new player starts with 1,500 points. It's just an arbitrary value that they start with. And if you now lose against this new player, you lose some points. But if you lose against Ian or Max or Evan, you don't lose as many points because they have a higher ranking than you, and on average you would expect that the one with the higher ranking wins. So a loss there doesn't hurt as bad as a loss against someone with a low ranking, and that leads to these be very sweet because there's so much variance in this game, and even the best player, he can sit down at an average table and just lose and lose and lose. It's possible, and that really hurts his ranking. So the disclaimer here is don't put too much attention onto the exact rankings. If you're somewhere at the top third or somewhere, it's good.
Yeah. Make sure that like top 1%, a single game win over some people ahead of you will swap positions pretty easily. I mean, it's just that, it's that close. But really interesting data points. Really, really, really cool. Fun to see people on here and like look at people I want to chase and like think about it that way. It's just fun.
At this point, I also wanted to give a shout out to two guys from Top Deck. Their Discord names are just it's Alex and Sephirex. They're doing a lot of work, and I've been talking with them about ELO in the context of CEDH a lot. So this implementation that is currently there is also heavily influenced by them. So also shout out to them and thanks a lot.
And I'm excited to see like what else you come up with, because this is a new angle of looking at CEDH that we just haven't been able to do before. I remember when I first got into CEDH, Squirrel Mob had his metagame project where he was trying to collect data to try to get some of this kind of information. It just wasn't possible, but now it is. With EDH Top 16 and the work you're doing, we get to really look at this stuff in depth like never before. For those that don't know, the metagame project was like voluntary information. So it was like people would submit their games into the metagame project into like a form. And the problem with it was because it was so self-reported, it was skewed by people not reporting games or people reporting too many games. So like I was playing Elsha at the time, and I was on the Elsha Discord, and there was a big push on the Elsha Discord like, hey guys, report your games. So there was a couple of month periods there where Elsha suddenly saw a big spike in the data, and that was because we were just simply reporting it more. So it just made it difficult to make that data useful. So very different than where we are now.
Yeah.
All right. Well, so Datatog, man, this was really, really useful, really great information. I hope you guys enjoyed it. We're going to try to have you on again, sort of as a regular to sort of do a quick analysis of data as time goes on, and keep appraised of where the meta is and what's working and what's not. If there's any cool decks that rise to the top, we want to see all of that. So really appreciate your time. Really enjoyed having you on here, man.
Yeah, thanks. It's my pleasure.
So with that, I'm gonna take us out because Max Sternberg, aka WoundedSatellite, is not here. I'll say thank you everybody for joining. Colors are a crutch. I hope you enjoyed this. If you did, please give us a like and a subscribe. Check out our Patreon if you want to support us a little bit more. If you want some coaching, reach out to WoundedSatellite to talk to him, and he will happily provide you coaching. Join our Discord so you can enjoy the conversations and talk about all of this stuff. Tell us how wrong we are and how our rankings are stupid, etc., etc. We love those conversations. I enjoy them. Datatog joined us today. Thanks so much, man. Really appreciate your time. Thanks.
Awesome.